This is Fresno's Fabulous Past, a look at the pop culture environment of the city of Fresno from 1950 to 1990. And here is your host, Dale Mell.
In the background, you're listening to Holiday for Strings, written by David Rose, performed here by Billy Vaughn and his orchestra. This is part 2 of Lorraine Martin, a.k.a. Nancy Allan's movie matinee, and we go into when she started work in '54 for KMJ-TV, Channel 24, to the early 60s. Part 3 will be the late 60s and interviews with well-known film and television stars. So enjoy the program of Nancy Allan of Nancy Allan's movie matinee, a.k.a. Lorraine Martin.
Well, I didn't hear anything from them for a week or more, and it was around Easter time. And we went down, my little family, to see an uncle and aunt who lived in the L.A. area. And while I was there, I got to thinking about it, and I just couldn't wait. I called Channel 24 from Los Angeles and said that I was just wondering if there had been any decision made. And Joe Thomas said, no, there hasn't. But he said, when we make a decision, we'll let you know. In other words, it was kind of a don't call again. So I didn't. But in about a week after that, he called and said, you're our girl. And we're off.
We're going to talk about some of the movies and some that influenced me where I saw them over and over again because you had a certain package. But you started at KMJ about 1954?
To tell you the truth, I'm not certain, and I never bothered to look it up. My son, who has a mind for dates, and he was, of course, a little kid when I began, but he thinks it was 54. I remember chiefly the 60s, but when I began, KMJ was still in the B building.
Really?
Yes, still in the B building, and that's where I auditioned for the job and where I did the first year. And when I began, I was a pioneer in the field, so to speak. I didn't have any sponsors. I had no stated goal except to be entertaining, and they kind of left it up to me what to do. So I began just presenting what I thought were interesting little stories, mentioning books that I'd enjoyed, and then I rustled up interviews. And some other people who were on KMJ radio. There was one who had a kind of cowboy show, I remember, something like that. Well, I don't remember other particular guests. I think I had some local civic leaders come in and talk about projects that were going on. And right from the beginning, although I can't tell you where my first one, every celebrity who came to town was always looking for publicity, so they would bring them in for an interview. If they were political, of course, the newsmen would get them. But I got all of the others, the people for town hall, the people who were addressing the Rotary Club, and people are so interesting. I never really remember anybody who was difficult.
Well, you mentioned Eleanor Roosevelt.
Well, that was the peak of my whole experience. Yeah, that was early on, too. I have a wonderful picture of me and Mrs. Roosevelt when she was plugging Adlai Stevenson for president. I know that was 1956. That was an election year. And when they told me that I would be able to interview her, it was going to be at the Californian Hotel. And I was so impressed that I thought probably she won't give us more than 5 minutes of her time. Even though I knew her to be a lovely lady, I thought she might be regal after all. This is the former president's wife. So Kingsley Amos, who was one of our cameramen, went with me, and we went to the Hotel Californian and went up to wherever they gave us space for the interview and waited for her entrance. Well, she didn't make an entrance. She just walked in. She was the most informal, down-to-earth, friendly person. She sat down next to me and reached over and kind of patted my hand. Smiled at me, and she said, "What would you like to know?" or "How shall we begin?" or something of the kind, and off we started. Well, as it turned out, I could have had her there for as long as we wanted. And Kingsley Amos, who could have torn his hair out, ran out of film after 10 minutes. So we had the interview, and it was a good one, but what I might have had.
What you might have had.
It was a great experience. I'll never forget it.
She is the front runner to be on the $10 bill as the first woman on Money. She gets my vote. Either Rosa Parks or Eleanor Roosevelt. Those two get my vote.
Well, I would agree with you. Either Rosa Parks would be fine, but I would choose Mrs. Roosevelt. There's no one quite like her. No other woman in our country, really, who has been that influential and had that much of an effect on the world we live in.
Were you studying for this? Were you a thespian at one time? Were you wanting to go into radio from college?
In college, I was a music minor. I was an English major. So I had done a good deal of performing in musicals and on the drama department at college. I was, used to an audience and performing. And I had been married then for a few years to an excellent speech teacher. While I'd never had a class from him, you learn just being around people who are eloquent and who speak beautifully. You could see I had the advantage. Real preparation for it. I did have to, of course, get used to the cameras. Nothing like that had ever been in my experience. And I remember probably was the very first program. I had a little set, a background of some kind, and there was a table, and I was sitting on a chair, and we decided that I would have a tea set and a cup of tea in my hand to look like some woman who might be expecting guests and would chat a little bit with whoever was tuned in. I was so nervous that the teacup kept jumping and rattling on the saucer, so I put that down. And I went on with the little chatter that I had thought about and was prepared to give, but I was really rattled. I was just frightened and unsure, but I obviously did well enough that they didn't yank me off the air and take the job away from me. But I remember the floor man, which is the man who gives the signals, and you follow the camera with the red lights, but they have signals as to time, how much time is left and all that. The signal for quit, it's over, stop, is to drag your finger under your chin. He kept doing that until he was desperate, until I finally caught on and said, time to say goodbye, hope to see you tomorrow. And I was off to the next 15 years.
All right, I got a bunch of quick questions for you. Let's see what we can do. What was the movie you mentioned that made you laugh and they had to cut away? You were laughing so hard. It could be the Marx Brothers or a comedian. Do you recall the movie that just made you laugh and you couldn't stop laughing during the... I
remember the name of the movie. I remember because this was really embarrassing. It was very unprofessional that I could not contain my laughter, but it just simply struck me funny. It was somebody who was in a vaudeville act, and he was one of those bicycles that has a huge front tire and fell off the stage into the orchestra pit. Now, I know he might have been injured, so I don't know why I didn't think of that. Should have felt bad for him, but instead, it just tickled the life out of me. I couldn't stop, and I remember they finally went to a commercial, and when we came out of it, I was ready to apologize and go on, but I started to laugh again. As I said, it was really unprofessional, but that never happened again, fortunately.
So you saw a lot of these movies. Who was your favorite actress and actor that you thought, oh boy, this is coming up, I'm looking forward to this?
I'm a real movie buff, always have been. I grew up in an age when I think our family would never have failed to go a week without seeing a movie, and we might have well gone twice to the movies in a week. So I really liked them all. I watched them right along with the audience. Yes. I love movies.
Well, for some reason in the 80s, I developed a crush on Hedy Lamarr. I had to meet somehow Hedy Lamarr. I talked to her son, Anthony Loder, in L.A. He was a photographer. He says, well, I usually don't make contacts with anybody because they want something. I go, Anthony, don't want anything. I added music to one of her earlier films, and I just want to send it to you to send to your mom. You can watch it. Okay. So back in 86, I was able to talk to Hedy Lamarr, who lived in Florida at the time. So I had a big crush on the most beautiful woman in the world back in the late 30s, early 40s, Hedy Lamarr.
She was a gorgeous creature. I remember well.
And now stay tuned for part 3 as we get into Nancy Allan's movie matinee from the mid to late 60s into the early 70s, where she talks about people she interviewed, the movie stars, the TV stars, and the recording stars. So stay tuned for that. It's all right here on Fresno's Fabulous Past. Glad to be your host. This is Dale Mel.